computer. Awesome. What is up, everybody? It is your host, Gordy Bonker. And guys, we have a special podcast episode today. We're coming live from the Bonkers Cards Club meeting, and I have this very special guest with me today, Mr. Brian Kappel. For those of you that aren't familiar with Brian, Brian recently published a book that got a lot of traction in the hobby last year titled Relief. And talking about some really interesting discoveries around the 1948, or should I say 49, Leaf set. So very excited to have
This
Brian.
meeting is being recorded.
And let me just ask if I can mute everybody as well. If you guys aren't on mute, just jump on mute. But yeah, Brian, thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited to have you here, man. And you're calling from a very special place to me, I believe. You're calling from State College, correct?
State College, we are.
That's what I'm talking about. Penn State, I'm a class of 2018, and I still think about that interception that Drew Alar threw like once a week from the college football playoff. It's in my nightmares.
Yeah, yeah. It lingers with all of us.
Yeah. Well, Brian, I'm so excited to have you, and I want to start by allowing yourself to kind of give yourself a little bit of a background to everybody who's listening or on the call. Just about, honestly, I think it'd be really interesting to hear your career, both professionally, but then also from the hobby, because we're all collectors here. I would love to hear about your collecting journey as well. So if you want to start, maybe let's start with the fun stuff. Let's talk about your collecting career.
Sure.
How long have you been a collector? What do you like to collect? And tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I got my first cards in at a birthday party in 1986. So that was like the gateway drug into just collecting junk wax. So, as a kid, I was 86, 87, went heavy into 88 because always stopped by the pharmacy on the way home from school and pick up a 35-cent pack with some gum. And from there, I grew up in a really small town in the Finger Lakes, New York, and we had a card shop. And so I was actually able to join up with the dealer. And so started at a pretty young age doing shows and just kind of collecting there and just going to garage sales, picking up stuff and everything. And made a shift during the whole, early 90s and stuff like that, where I started picking up vintage cards. And so was able to kind of find my way. My parents were antique dealers. And so found my way into a bunch of auctions and started picking up tobacco cards early. And
And
so
that was in the 1990s. You
I
started
was in
about.
the 90s, yeah. Yeah. And so I was actually at a auction, this literally a barn, and they just had all their cases and they were just full of cards. And I picked up every single T206 that I could, but passed on a 33 Gaudi Ruth, the
Mm.
144, because I was like, yeah, it's all right. I've done well today. So course, look back on that and just, couldn't live it down. But ironically enough, found another 144 in an auction house in Oregon once I moved out there and got it for $300.
I was
So,
going to ask you, I was so interested to ask about the price point. What is a tobacco card in the 90s going for when you're finding it out there? Do you remember?
so when I picked them up, I think the average was probably $18, but
Wow.
they were all Hall of Famers. I just didn't know it yet because again, I had been so skewed in kind of like the 80s, 90s, watching Yankees on WPIX out of the city and everything like that. It's like I was current, so it's like I didn't know a Frank Home Run Baker. I didn't know a Mordecai Brown. I didn't know all these guys that I had picked up. And literally, as I was researching them by going through, the old Beckett Bibles and
Right.
seeing the HOF next to all of them, I'm like, holy cow, I got all Hall of Famers here. So that kind of began the romance with older cards. And so that kind of continued on, through the 90s. You go to college, start a career. I actually worked for Nike when I was at Penn State, so that carried me out to Oregon. Worked for them designing graphic tees and apparel in college football and Major League Baseball for about 6 years, and then got into the kind of the creative agency world, and so started doing customization, events, retail design. Actually ended up back doing contract work for Nike, doing color design for footwear and things like that. So, it's kind of this wandering path of being able to do the design work and the creativity. And then when the kids started getting older is when I kind of started going back to the cards. And that's kind of what got me around to the Leaf cards is because seeing a couple of the cards, having a background in art and design, there was like a visual attraction to them. And so I started, collecting them and everything like that and found that the first 49 cards were super easy to come by and then never realized that there was the short print side. And so, when I got the Jackie Robinson in, bought it from a divorcee for very little, but it came in and there was no detail in the hat, and I thought that I got a reprint. I thought it was fake, and so I sent it off to PSA to get graded, and it got graded a 4. And so that started me looking at the actual cards themselves, and that's kind of what led to the book was
Yeah,
kind of going through from that aesthetic side and being like, all right, I know the process by which these cards were printed, and I know that a true variation, going back to the let's call it the Billy Ripken, let's call it, whatever it is, an actual change of a printing plate is a variation, and realizing that half of the cards in that first issue of 49, actually more than half, it was like 37 of them, had some kind of actual visual change to the cards. So that started me on the whole path of trying to figure out, well, why everybody called it a 48 set, why some people call it 49 set, and then everything else that kind of went into it.
totally. Yeah, no, and obviously I want to really get into what got you to that point of wanting to write the book. I'm glad that you touched on your career at Nike because you've always been a creative person, and I'm sure that aided you in the journey of what it takes to write a book. It's not an easy task to do. So, you've always been a collector, you've been interested in it, you've had some good finds, and you kind of led into it already. But I wanted to really understand from your point of view what made it so that you said to yourself, I need to write a book about this. What was the moment where you're like, people need to know what I'm writing about? Because it's not an easy thing to do. So to share that kind
Yeah,
of
yeah, no, and I think that's what it was is when I started the book, and we're going back probably, well, the book took me 2 years to write, but putting the set together is kind of was like the inception of going through and kind of getting all the information, and that comes on the heels of, I think it was 2006. My father-in-law and I put together a 1914 and a 1915 Cracker Jack set.
wow.
He funded it. I did all the legwork on it, put them together. He put it up to auction. I enjoyed the process of the hunt. And again, as all collectors do, we all find the things that we kind of want to chase down. And so I wanted to do something that he wasn't funding, that was, I was funding and keeping. And so when I found the Leaf cards, it was like, all right, well, that 48 49 thing, there was so many questions that were out there. That's what kind of started things. It's like I couldn't just take it at face value. It's like, knowing the ins and outs of the Cracker Jacks, as you know, when you go through, you put together a set, you kind of get infatuated with something, you start kind of digging into it.
Yeah.
That kind of knowledge of what they looked like, how it was made, why there's so many questions about it in the industry. So it's like going on Net 54 and having everybody had a theory, but nobody had ever taken the time to actually go through and kind of like connect the thread wall type thing.
Right.
And so that's what it started with. It started with, again, on the aesthetic side of seeing the cards and seeing that the industry recognized, those three variations, the Hermansky error, the Aberson, and the Kent Peterson, but why it was just those three. Like that was the part I couldn't wrap my head around. It's like, well, why is there just three errors, but there's actually things that you can see? Like if you go and you look at Stan Musial cards, there's black hat and there's a red hat version. And I'm like, well, so why are they not calling it out if they're calling out a Kent Peterson black hat and red hat version? And so then, that started things down the rabbit hole there. The great part was is that my dad is a retired scientist, and so he does research like crazy. And so once I kind of laid out the framework of this theory of, hey, these cards are really interesting. I think there's more to it than what we're seeing here. He just started digging too, and so we would have these like collaborative calls where I would be like, "Hey, I found this," and he's like, "Yeah, I found an interview for this," and we'd start connecting things together.
Yeah. And so I actually want to get a little bit into some of the research and discovery that you had. And I think one of the overarching themes, and I have a copy of the book right here, there seems to be in this time period a lot of production quality challenges that the lead company had, whether it was the quality of the ink or how it was being pressed. I think that could, obviously, you could speak more to it, have contributed to some of all these different variations that you're speaking about. Talk to me, like what were some of these quirky things? Because there's so many quirky things about this 48 49 Leaf set. And I know for anyone who's listening at home, Brian, he's calling it the 49 Leaf set very intentionally. A lot of you guys might recognize the set because people call it 48, but Brian, it's of your findings and your belief. Like this set should just be simply called the 49
Yeah,
Leaf.
it's a 49 league, and I think that's the thing is, again, when you start going through and looking at how the modern industry works, right? That what we call variations, what we call errors, what we call these kinds of things. And the way that Leaf produced the cards, it makes it very confusing for everybody.
Yeah.
Because, again, this was not a highly qualified, well-practiced lithography house. You know, Basically what I was able to do is I was able to find the candy boxes. This was a candy company. I think that's the most important thing. And for anybody who owns their own business, if you have a piece of equipment that sits in the corner and you're like, wait, I can find another way to make money off of that piece of equipment, that's essentially what they did. Is that they were able to sit there and say, okay, we've got a one color press that we're running through all of our candy boxes on. We can make cards. We can send it through and we can do that. So I think that what happened is that it was probably a swing shift. It was probably something that they weren't going to halt the production of boxes during the day, but they were going to run them at night. And so what they would do is they would pass them through one color at a time, four color process for the baseball, and that's why you get all the registration issues. That's why you get things that fall off registration. That's why you get color shifts. That's why you get, you know, there's a couple, and the great thing about just the hobby community in general is when the book came out, I started getting just random emails from people at card shows going, "Is this one of one?" And it's a Joe DiMaggio with no black ink, and I'm
Right.
like, technically, it's one of four. So it's like taking terminology from now and putting it against the fact that on one sheet of cardboard, essentially they would print four sets of 49.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's that kind of quirkiness where it was more of a functional print and less of an aesthetic print. It was like they would get the images and they would just run them through as quick as they possibly could. And it's interesting as you look through because they produced four sets between 48 and 49. They produced four sets essentially. It started with the pirates, the swashbucklers, the blackbeards, those kinds of things. That's where they kind of had the development of the numbers because there is a series of those pirate cards that actually have no number. And so I think that the sales group basically came back and said, "Hey, look, kids will buy more cards if you put a number on the back."
Mm.
And then Leaf being Leaf was like, if we skip number of these cards, they'll never get the set and they'll keep on buying the gum. So that's where it started. Then it went into boxing, football, baseball came out in 49, and then the second issue of football came out in fall of 49.
So yeah, that's actually I wanted to talk a little bit more as well about some of the specific examples that you have as to why this set should be only called 1949 Leaf. I know we spoke a little bit just now in terms of the production quality issues that created some of these different variations in terms of the ink and things like that. But can you speak at all to why you have the conviction that you do on the fact that this set was 1949? It should not
Yeah.
be
So
1949.
that was an epiphany. And again, everything that I did was trying to find that kind of smoking gun. So it's like talking to guys who were actually on press in the late 40s. I had a great uncle who worked in Manhattan at a press after the war, and so brought him the cards and showed them to him, and he was just howling because the place that he worked at was actually like a print shop. And so seeing those, he's like, yeah, well, these guys aren't printing Van Goghs. It was like bare minimum, just print it to get it out the door type thing. But that led to my dad and I going to the Chicago History Museum and looking at the personal effects of Marshall Leaf, who is the son of Solomon Leaf, who started the company. And so in there, that's where we got a lot of the picture evidence of the production floor, the factory on North Cicero, where they actually, produced all the candy and stuff like that. But they also had basically the presses running, and they showed where they actually had the production. I've got that in the book, that picture in the book. But as I was getting ready to actually push this out to print, I got a email from someone on Net 54 that basically said, "Hey, I just went to the Cook County Archives. The lawsuit between Bauman and Leaf has never been digitized, but I've got pictures of the entire thing." And so he sent me page by page, basically like iPhone photos of the complaint, the rebuttal, and then the settlement. And so in that, from Marshall Leaf, who was at the time in 1949 was the president of Leaf, he basically says, yeah, the first truck left Chicago for Boston March 12th, 1949.
Right. And so that court case now is some of that content in your book? I know you said that
Yep.
was coming as it
Yep,
was.
it's right in the middle of it. I took, scans and I actually go through and highlight it. And, the whole lawsuit kind of started from a internal document that Leaf had produced for the sale of the baseball cards. And in that, they say everything from, it talks about the premiums, the things that came in the bottom of the box that are insanely difficult to find. But then it also talks about the fact that they're bigger than the Bauman cards and better for lagging, which is, for those who know what lagging is, it's like low-level gambling for kids that you just throw your cards up against the wall and whoever lands it up straight, it gets everybody else's card.
Mhm.
And then they say that there's going to be 300 plus players in the set, and all of the 1949 backs are written by sports writers. So it's like the information's there, and it's like if you look at the actual backs of the cards, and I think this was the thing that a lot of people went through, especially on like I said, the Net 54 boards. There's a guy, Ted Zanadakis, who was like the proponent of 1949 Leaf. He was the guy who was there screaming it, and I was able before he passed to have a lot of conversations with him because he remembered as a kid going through, and he lived in Jersey and bought the cards and remembered, where they came out and had his full collection. So I was able to kind of cross-reference, oh, hey, your Peterson, does he have black hat or a red hat? Oh, he's got a black hat. Okay, so it's an early print. So it's just being able to kind of cross-reference those things. And then just recently, I actually got a guy reached out to me whose father was 16 at the time and had diary entries of him going down and buying the cards and getting the premiums. And he shared all those images, and those were all early prints as well. So it's like, to go through it, it's like you get the actual validation from the people who lived it, and then you get the side of it that if you read just the backs of the cards, there's things that happened, you know, Babe Ruth's passing, that's August of 48. Okay. You know, Satchel makes his debut in July of 48. And you're like, okay, so it could work as a 48 issue. But then you start looking at the backs of like the guys who got MVP that year. Those didn't come out until mid-November of 48. And then there's one trade, or I think two trades. One was, I think, Harry Walker from the Pirates to the Cubs happened December 12th. Okay, so now you've got a window
Yeah.
that it's like for a candy company to stop producing candy in order to produce cards between December 12th and December 25th, it just wouldn't happen. So they would wait until March. And so they produced in March, everything left in March, like March 12th, and then the lawsuit came down, I think probably like a week, 10 days later.
Yeah, I did read a good bit about that lawsuit when I first came across the news about your book and some of the articles that were written about the lawsuit, and then on Sports Illustrated collectibles, just having this whole discussion
And,
topic.
and so what's funny about that is that they actually cited the book, which I thought was hilarious. So that, I think it was John, I can't remember his last name, but he was the lawyer who went through and kind
Yeah.
of, we did a Saber presentation together. And it was funny because he went through and kind of validated everything that I had pulled out of that because I actually read it first. And then he went through and kind of read it with a lawyer's eye. And so at the end, there was this like high five that the design guy actually got the law stuff right. So,
Yeah. No, but I was trying to, apologies, I lost my thought with that. But one of the things that I wanted to ask you, obviously this news comes out, we have very good evidence that shows that this set really wasn't going out until 1949.
yep.
This is a really important era in sports card collecting and baseball history because of the time period in which Jackie Robinson is coming to the major leagues. My impression when I read the news about your book, as well as the lawyer you're referencing and that article, immediately gravitated towards the fact that the 1949 Leaf, Jackie Robinson, has been the kind of the iconic rookie card for Jackie Robinson throughout the history of the hobby. But my mind went to that is not his rookie card. If anything, maybe you could say he shares his rookie with 49 Bowman. I felt that his true rookie now belongs to the 1947 Bond Bread card. And I do think that was really impactful information in terms of what shifts the valuation potentially of the Bond Bread card market, but also potentially the Leaf market, depending on what you think about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in terms of what this news does to the valuations of both Leaf and then other sets, and specifically the Jackie Robinson market. Because for better or worse, I think when you think of Leaf, you think of that Jackie Robinson rookie, which, in my opinion, is not the most visually aesthetic card of Jackie Robinson's by a long
No.
shot.
No, yeah, it's funny because it's like the best way to answer this that I found is kind of like putting it in the context of just card collecting in general, right? And so it's one of those things that yes, the Bond bred 47, but I think that that's never been contested as a rookie card because it came out in 47. So regardless of where the Leaf set fell, it was still a year before it, if it was considered a 48. When
Yeah.
it slides to 49, then we get into like an 80s scenario, right? Where it's like, all right, we want to talk about Tony Gwynn rookie cards. Well, he's got three. You
Yeah.
know, so now it comes down to which is the personal preference of it. And I also think that you can stretch it a little bit further too, and say, okay, well, the bomb bread is really kind of a regional issue where it's pretty specialized on where it was distributed. So now you've got almost like a 86 Jordan type scenario, right? Where everyone recognizes the 86 Jordan as rookie card until everybody remembers about star cards in 84. So now you kind of have this, divide line between which is the real rookie, which is not the real rookie, and what are the values and everything like that. And so I think it's funny because any blowback that I've got as it's kind of come out, I kind of have to rebuttal it with, yeah, well, guess what? My 49 Jackie is now worth a little bit less too. So I think it really still comes down to personal preference because I think when you're looking for a true rookie card, everybody can kind of rationalize it any which way they want. If it's the bomb bread is that regional issue, and then you have the kind of the broad kind of mass release, then you look at Bauman and Leaf.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair way to look about it. And actually, when I wrote my article in response to reading about your book and that article, that's the exact comparison that I made was the 84 star and the 86 Fleer Michael Jordan. And obviously, this last year or two, you've seen crazy valuations of the star, now way surpassing the
Yep.
Fleer in most
Yep.
cases. Obviously, it's one thing that's unique about the Jackie Robinson situation is the population of these bond-bred Jackies are extremely low. They're only graded at SGC. PSA doesn't grade them because there's a lot of confusion, to be honest, with the fact that the exhibit cards often have the same exact picture, but you can
Yep.
tell it's kind of strange to me because you can tell a true bond-bred because of the rounded corners versus the
Right.
straight edges.
Yep.
But for whatever reason, maybe because it's been difficult to tell people counterfeiting and trying to round the corners themselves, PSA stayed away. But for a true collector that knows, 47 Bond Bread has the rounded edges. It's the first time Jackie appears on a card. But the national distribution release, I'm curious to know, I guess, does Bauman and Leaf, they come to the stores roughly at the same time. So it'd be similar today if Panini and Topps released the same type
Yeah.
of card.
We're talking weeks, I would say, in between
Yeah.
the
So,
releases.
yeah.
So, if the first box hits out or heads out of Chicago, March 12th, I think Bauman came out soon thereafter
Yeah.
because there was a second injunction that Bauman actually put against Leaf, and that was in May. And
Okay.
that was essentially shutting down all East Coast distribution. So I think in that zone, they were still mired in the whole lawsuit thing. And I think that's when the short prints were essentially just pumped out, just trying to get rid of the stuff because they were just like, this is, the juice ain't worth the squeeze on this one. So let's just get it out.
And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of detail. I want to make sure that we leave a lot of meat on the bone for everyone to go read Brian's book because he does put a lot more detail into the lawsuit. He's talking about the short prints. The book also has images, some really cool images in terms of the different variations, the versions. Some of your research you did, even showing like pictures of the production facility, stuff that I admire to the depth that you went in terms of your research. And you can obviously tell you're super passionate and educated about this subject matter. So take it from me, guys. Definitely go check out Brian's book. And I have linked it in my newsletter a couple of times, and I'll post it again after this interview in the link in the description of the YouTube video and stuff. It's an awesome read. But I guess before I open it up to the audience for questions, I kind of want to ask you in terms of your writing process that you went through, because writing a book can be tedious. Is this something that you went through it and you were like, I want to do this again, or you like, I never want to do this again? I'm curious.
So it's funny. I enjoyed it. It's not a difficult read. I mean, like I said, I'm a design guy, so there's lots of
Yeah.
pretty pictures and very few words. It's not in depth and you know equations to this, that, and the other thing. It's meant as like a reference book. And so that middle section that you're talking about, it's the side by side comparison saying, look, that whole red hat, black hat thing, that happened several times. And here's if you want to go out to a card show, you can find the ones that are more rare by looking at that. And so that was the thought behind that. I enjoyed writing it because it was this great collaboration kind of between myself and my wife and my kids and my dad. So it was this great thing that we were kind of all passing around and just having a hoot, just kind of, oh, dad's going crazy again, talking about baseball cards and being able to kind of, bounce thing off and watch their kind of reaction to it. So had a lot of fun doing it. And I think there is a plan once we kind of, get settled and stuff like that to write another one. I wanted to write another one about 1940 Superman issues, but
Oh,
got shut down by DC. So that one kind of was dead before it rolled out. So
okay, got it. So still kind of formulating what you think the next book maybe could be about.
yeah, I like kind of dwelling in the fringe of the hobby, kind of the outliers and stuff like that. Because in
Yeah,
the conversations I had with PSA, trying to get them to kind of come around on recognizing some of the variations,
I was
you
going
know,
to ask you about that as well.
yeah. So it's interesting because you look at the 48 and the 49 football sets, and they go deep. Like they call out every variation, but it's funny what they call out as variations are actually just misprints. That essentially, as they would send, these sheets through the printing press, if a key, one of the inkwells would go dry, you'd have something that would have a color variation, not because it was intentional, because it was almost like a user error type thing. And so, but PSA recognizes all those. So you'll see times that they're like, oh, it's a white background instead of a yellow background. It's like, no, they just didn't print the yellow ink.
So, as where we stand today, has there been any additional variations that PSA has approved from this book? Not yet.
No grading company has even taken a second look at it. And again, the hill that I'm choosing to die on is the fact that they already recognize it. They just don't recognize the full breadth of it.
Yeah.
With the Peterson, because it's interesting because the Aberson was a change that was made early on. The short sleeve, long sleeve, that happened very early on, and it just kind of happened kind of midstream type thing that they just kind of changed it from that short sleeve look to the long sleeve look, and off they went. The Hermansky, I think, is just a straight ink error. And where this Hermansky fell on the actual sheet itself was the lower right-hand corner. And so when they were pulling red ink, I think that just because of the verticality of the eye, it just got filled in. So you can actually find Hermanskys out there that have the I totally filled in and the K partially filled in.
Yeah, so I was looking to see if I had any Leaf cards with me because I have my personal collection. I mostly collect 54 tops, Hank Aaron, a little bit of Satchel Paige and Babe Ruth. So I don't have a lot of Leaf with me usually. I found one just by chance. It's this Johnny Lindell. It's
Yep.
probably one of the cheaper 48 Leaf cards. But as I'm listening to you talk and I'm looking at this card, there's just these strange like where his sleeves are. It looks like literally somebody took like a blue marker and the artwork of this set is so obscure and I don't know for better or worse you know a leaf card as soon as you see it
Oh yeah.
because of that like this random block of color it looks like it shouldn't be there and I guess what you're saying is oftentimes these little nuances may show that this is a more rare version because they're kind of just covering stuff up. They're changing it as there goes. Leaf's kind of crazy in that way.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. It was from the way they practiced to the fact that the core of the lawsuit was about the fact that they didn't have agreements with any of the players because Solomon Leaf didn't believe in paying players to use their likeness. So he was just like, yeah, they're athletes. I get to use their pictures. So that was the core of why Bauman kind of went after him, and then everything else kind of fell in line that they were defamatory in what they were saying and all that kind of fun stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah, you could pick out a leaf from across the room. And what's funny about that Lindell that you hung, there is a late print version of that where his black hat turns blue. And so it's like once you know what to look for, and in all reality, the DiMaggio is the exact same,
Hmm.
and Phil Rizzuto. Then they kind of have those blue sleeves too. But then in later printings, which is accounts in about 30% of the population, the black hat goes to blue.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, there's so many little Easter eggs I'm sure you know of that exist in this set, and I'm sure again, for anybody listening or watching us talk about this, definitely check out the book because you'll be able to get a little window inside of Brian's brain, who's been doing so much research on this. So, Brian, thank you for your contribution to the hobby in doing this. Myself, I love the hobby, but I also love the history of the league and of the industry. Everything that goes into what makes sports cards, I find it fascinating. I think that time period's interesting where you're wrestling with the early stages of players recognizing their value as a brand, their name, their image, their likeness.
Yep.
You have players in this set, for example, Stan Musial, who was very finicky about how his name, image, and likeness was portrayed in sports cards. He was very famously not in tops, even though he's in the prime of his career. Just not in 52 or 53 tops or 54 tops. But he's in Leaf, and to your point, didn't really get the approval for it. But
Right.
then he's in a Red Heart dog food set. But then he comes into tops at the end in 1958. It's all really interesting to see how the history has evolved. Now today, I mean, you hear so much about the NIL in college sports. You have certain players that won't be in certain products. Their autographs will only be in a certain product. So it's become a massive talking point in the industry today. But this was kind of like the stomping grounds of the push and pull of this as an industry war. So
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing that there is kind of a cycle to things. That it's like that you have these issues that are now prevalent in sport, and it's like it was big back then. I mean, Johnny Mize actually was and I think that even goes back further into like the tobacco era too. That you have
yeah,
these things that kind of come up that it's like, no, I'm not endorsing that, and there's full on lawsuits that are just like, what is public domain? What is, for someone famous, what is that? Can they sell exclusive rights to somebody? So, I mean, reading the lawsuit, it was just kind of interesting how the judges were actually ruling on this in the late 40s.
yeah,
But you're right. And I think that's one of the allures just from the collector side for me is the kind of cross section of, or I would say more crossroads of baseball history that happened in that set, just because they were trying to cherry pick names that would resonate with people. So it's like that's why you have Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams, and you've got Babe Ruth, and then you start getting into the fact that, yeah, okay, Jackie's in 47. Satchel in 48, Larry Doby. So now, now we're starting to kind of lay the groundwork for what comes next type thing. And then, like you said, you've got Stan Musial, who didn't show up in many sets other than the Burke Ross, which again was one that kind of lived on the fringe, that it was not necessarily an approved set, but it kind of was out there.
yeah.
So it becomes a very interesting, again, if you keep it in the context of the fact that they were candy guys and they liked the cards because that helped the gum not break, it kind of makes sense why they used the names they used.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, again, guys, the book is Relief, and what I want to do, and I'll keep the Q&A portion in our podcast and for the YouTube video. If there is anybody in the audience watching tonight, again, we've got the Bonkers Cards Club June meeting. Brian is actually our special guest tonight, and that is where we're getting this interview from. And we've got a bunch of Bonkers Cards Club members out there. If there's anybody that has any thoughts or questions or just observations they've had from me and Brian's conversation this far, feel free to unmute yourself, say hi, and feel free to shoot away a couple questions here. Would love to hear from you guys. If anyone's out there, I'll give it a second. I know some people need to fumble off of mute. I'm going to ask a very simple question in the meantime, Brian, if we don't have a question from the audience, and that is simply, what is your favorite Leaf card?
So he actually wrote a chapter about it. It's the George Vico card. That was the one that stopped me in my tracks, where it just looked like a Shepherd Fairy type print. And yeah, that's the card that kind of lured me in. That looked reminiscent of a Andy Warhol print, and I was just like, "Yep, that's it. This is now interesting to me."
Yes,
And again, as a Yankee fan, I mean, the Ted Williams card, I would argue, yeah, there we go.
yeah. Yeah, the color is super neat there, and I love that. Yeah, no, it's great because of your design background and you have that artistic side to you. You can appreciate these cards regardless of the player's contribution.
Yeah,
Just like the visual appeal of this card is something
right.
that spoke to you, which I think a lot of collectors undersell to themselves why they like a specific player set or card. It's like these cards are art, and I think cards have started to kind of act like artwork in terms of the collectibles industry and especially their market performance and how they're valued. So I think that's a really neat fact that it's somebody a little under the radar as your favorite card. It's not just some big name Hall of Famer.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I see, Chris, I see you jumped off of video. You have a question for Brian?
Yeah, hey, Brian, glad you were able to come in and enjoyed all the information you've given us so far, and congratulations on the book.
Thank
I
you.
hope it goes. How long did it take you to write the book?
2 years.
2 years. And then kind of one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of modern cards. So those are what, 75 years ago. Do you think 75 years from now they're going to be arguing about the rookie cards that are out there now? Because I can find 10 Paul Skeens cards that have the rookie logo on them. And the session two, then the museum, then there's this, and every one of them says they have a rookie card on them. So years down the road, are we going to be arguing about what is somebody's true rookie card?
So, it's an interesting conversation. And again, for anybody who has a toe dipped in junk wax, I think that the rules, the industry changed and adapted, I would say. Because I think 75 years from now, I think people are going to look at the cards and just the production numbers. And I think that what they're going to see is
Hmm.
it's a generated rarity. Like
Yeah,
it's not an actual rarity. It's I'm going to manufacture the rarity into this card and I'm going to print a million of them, but I'm only going to print one that says one of one. And I think it
right.
was last year there was something that came out that they had double printed a one of one. So
Yeah.
it's like it's a slippery slope on newer cards, and so there's something in my mind that I'm kind of like, my lofty dream would be to get a one color lithography press and a players association license to basically produce short run cards.
Hmm.
Instead of going through and producing a million cards,
Yeah,
just producing a small run of them and just pushing them out and let them be rare on their own.
Yeah.
Let the true rarity be in the fact that only X amount were made, and not pull an upper deck and produce a bunch more. Just when they kind of take off, as they did with the Griffey rookie. But it's like, just printing it in a small run. Let the rarity be in the rarity of the actual production run, not in something that you're manufacturing into it to make it rare.
to make the one-on-one. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
good, good. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Chris, it's such an interesting point too, because I don't know if the founders of Leaf and Bauman and Topps even knew when they were creating this stuff then that there would be people debating,
Right,
talking about this 75 years later. And that happened to be the origin for a lot of, collectors. Obviously, baseball cards go back further than the late 40s and early 50s, but that's really where it starts to pick up and becomes a staple, like a actual activity, a part of Americana culture, something that the kids were doing largely. And I also think it coincided with just the growth in baseball in America. Those are like the golden years of baseball. So it's kind of weird now seeing this almost like the second cycle of like hyper production that's been happening. You have the junk
right.
there, the late 80s, the early 90s. And I'm not sure if you can call what we're in now a junk wax 2.0, because I do think there are a lot of things that we learned from the first initial wave of just mass production. But it is different because there are thousands of variations of rookie cards of the same player, to your point. And here, there's really not. You've got this core number of
Right.
rookie cards, and that's really what also attracted me to vintage when I started learning about it into the hobby, is that I could actually follow it and understand it. And it's very difficult for the
No
new.
parallels and blues and greens and
Right.
orange and all that kind of stuff. Do you collect modern, Brian?
No, I don't.
No.
No, it's funny. I try like I'll go into a card shop and stuff like that, and I'll be like, want to? Nah, I don't want to pack. It's just I think that's the thing is when I worked for the card shop, we used to crack so many packs just to get the big row boxes and stuff like that, and I'd have to organize them. That at a certain point, I just got totally turned off by it. I was just like, I would equate it to for those of us who remember cassettes, going out and buying a cassette for a song
Yeah.
where now the kids just go out and buy the song. I think that's how I approach new cards. That if I'm like, all right, you know what, Spencer Jones, I think is going to be a left-handed Aaron Judge. I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a PSA 10 Spencer Jones,
Yeah.
not autographed because I don't do autographs. Just give me a run-of-the-mill Spencer Jones, and then I'll just put it in a box and call it a day.
Yeah.
I still got to buy a pack once in a while just to tear it open. and you basically get all base cards, and I give them away in Halloween bags. So
Right. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
There's a couple of modern-ish products that I do like to buy. I like to buy Topps Heritage and because it has the vintage set design and they
Yeah.
do older.
Which again, marketing brilliance coming from the product side of it. I think
Yeah.
it's awesome because I've done that too. If I buy something, it'll be because, oh, look, it looks like an 87 Topps card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm like, "Ah,
I
I love
really
those."
like that. And then I'm starting to really wrestle with what vintage is. Especially more recently, I wrote a piece about Ken Griffey Jr. and how I think his prominence in the hobby is going to continue to rise because we are getting further away from his playing career, and the kids that grew up watching him are getting older, and a lot of them have children of their own and are getting re-entered into the hobby. And I'm starting to think about like what is considered vintage. And I can see it in myself. I'm looking at hobby boxes. When I was a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid, the premium product was Topps Triple Threads. It was the first year they did it, was 2006. And a hobby box of that goes for $1,000 now. And I kind of want to get that box of Triple Threads because I couldn't get that as a kid. And I've heard that said before by guys who are much older than me about cards that they wanted as a kid that they view as vintage. And as I get older, I'm going to think about Jeter and Pujols and those guys, and my kids are going to be like, Dad, I don't
Know who
care. I
that
don't know
is.
who that is.
Yeah.
So like, I do think there's something to be said that maybe vintage can be an evolving thing and it isn't just a fixed period in time, which I think the hobby has always kind of accepted, like up until 1980. Everything before it is vintage, everything after kind of fits into this more quote modern bucket. But I don't know what you guys think about that, but that's something that's been on my mind a lot lately of what is vintage and will it continue to evolve?
I think vintage always moves. I
Yeah.
think that's the fun part about vintage is that, as basically as people kind of get into that disposable income kind of bracket, it's like, those things that resonate with us from when we were kids, that becomes the vintage. And I think the thing that's great about baseball as a sport, and I mean, technically a lot of the different sports as well, is the older stuff becomes folklore. And I think that's where the draw to like true old cards comes from because it's almost like Pecos Bill. It's like, it's John Henry. It's these tall tales of
Yes.
these guys doing amazing things that kind of laid the groundwork for what is now the modern part of the sport.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's nothing before these guys, like these are the pillars, the foundation of the collecting hobby. I guess if you look at like the cigarette cards, the T206 guys like Cobb and Wagner, like those are really the foundations. But if you put the parallel to like American history, you think like you don't go before George Washington. There's no US president before then.
Right.
And
Yep.
Lincoln is still very early on in American history. Like those guys are always going to be early US presidents. But like as you get further along, like JFK is still like a vintage president. Like he's older, but in like the 70s and 80s, it didn't seem that way. So you can kind of see that in parallels throughout history, regardless if it's the sports car hobby or whatnot. But I like thinking that, and I mean, vintage is just a great category of cards, and I'm glad, Brian. I could tell you're a true hardcore vintage person. You'd fit right in here with the Bonkers Cards Club. So I'm so stoked that you're able to join and be able to talk. I did want to make sure I told you it would probably be a half hour. I know we're almost at an hour now, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but we're having a good time. It's hard not to get fired up about this
I
stuff.
like talking shop. So
Exactly. Does anyone else have any other questions for Brian? Otherwise, I will end up the episode here in a minute. It's kind of funny. Usually, everyone's got their video cameras on, but everyone's a little shy tonight, I think, because we have the interview. But if anybody else has any questions, I also, in my latest newsletter, put Brian's email address right on there so you could ask him any questions, debate him on any sort of topics that he might write in his book that get you fired up. So, I'll also again link the book to Relief, written by Brian Kappel. It's an awesome read for anybody in the hobby. And look, it's right around Father's Day. You can scoop it up on Amazon. Brian, is there any other information you want to share about how to get this book, where to find you, any other things that you want to plug?
yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing is the email's great. I love talking cards. I actually got an email today from a guy who found Jackie that had no yellow print in the back. Actually, I sent you the pictures of that one. But
Yeah.
it's just fascinating that things still kind of show up. We had a garage sale the other day, and a guy walked down 3 houses down from me I'd never met, walked down with a shoebox of 49 Leaf and 49 Bauman cards. And so
What? That's
like,
crazy.
he's like, I think, are you interested in this? And yeah. So, I think that it's one of those things that I absolutely love doing. So, yeah, questions, debates, anything like that, definitely fire me a note. The
And
book's
say your
on.
email address just in case people aren't hearing. Don't read the newsletter.
Yeah, it's BK. So Brian Kappel, BK at spacemonkeydesigns.com. One
Awesome.
monkey, lots of designs.
And you're on Instagram now as well, correct? You said you were starting
Yeah,
that.
between Space Monkeys on there, but also the Relief is on there as well.
Okay.
So
And people can find you on Instagram where? What's your Instagram handle?
it's Relief book. So,
Okay.
yep.
Awesome. Well, guys, Bonkers Cards Club meeting is not ending. We've got some fun games to be had yet. I got a couple of Bonkers Cards hats I want to give away, but this will end the interview portion of the evening with Brian. Brian, feel free to stick around if you want. If you need to bounce, totally get you. But Brian, on behalf of myself and the rest of the Bonkers Cards audience community, I want to say thank you. Thank you for publishing this book. Thank you for moving the hobby forward. We really appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for the opportunity.
Awesome.
It
And
was
I
very
will end
interesting.
the
Thank you
recording.
very much.
Yes. All righty. Let me just end the recording here, guys.